Hey everybody. Because I know it's so difficult to get all of us together, I decided that it might be easier if I brought our compliance monitoring training to each of you in the comfort of your own living rooms. This training is simply a review of the areas that were identified as by the BSE as needing improvement. Um, in the Hey everybody. Because I know it's so difficult to get all of us together, I decided that it might be easier if I brought the compliance monitoring training to you in the comfort of your living room. This training is simply a review of the areas that were identified by the BSE as needing improvement during the recent document review that was conducted at the school in March of 2020. Our school was required to complete an improvement plan in three different areas: least restrictive environment, disproportionate representation, and IEP document compliance. We have already addressed the first two areas, and we have submitted the corrective documents along with other files that satisfied the correction, and our final corrective action is this training. The video will review only the areas specific in the corrective action report. It's not going to go through all of the areas of the IEP. Included in the email that I've sent with the link to this video is also a link to this interactive infographic if you're interested in going back to review it on your own. On the infographic, there is also a little red exclamation point. When you are finished with the training, please go back and complete the survey. That if you click on that little red exclamation point, it'll take you to a training survey. Please complete that survey as soon as possible because we have to submit documentation to the state that we've done this training. So as you can see, there are 8 little green circles, all numbered 1 through 8. Those are the 8 areas that we were required to address. So those areas include PTRE, reevaluation and evaluation reports, invitations to participate, transition planning, local assessments, ESY determination, demographic information, and NOREP and IEP congruence. So we're going to go through each of these areas in a little more depth so that we are creating documents that are going to be compliant moving forward. So the first section of the corrective action was the PTRE. So the PTRE is the permission to reevaluate. We also have PTEs, which are the permission to evaluate. So when we send a PTRE or a PTE, we also have to ask parents permission and gain consent. We don't have to gain consent after the third attempt of trying to get that parent to agree to the reevaluation. We do need to get it on an initial evaluation. So the parent must check one of 3 boxes. The box that we're hoping that they're going to check is the box in the center that says I give consent for the reevaluation. When you're reviewing paperwork, please just ensure that the parent has checked the appropriate box. If the parent checks the box above or below it, something that might be unexpected, just contact the parent for clarification because we can always send a new copy to have the parent check the right box. On occasion, a parent did not check that box on purpose, and we also need to know that if that's the case. The second section refers to reevaluations and evaluation reports. If you look at the sample, it shows 2 different participant lists. The first one is without a list of participants and only their titles. The second lists the actual participants. The state wants to see that we are listing the actual participants. Please make sure that all those names are filled in. While it is required to have all parties sign the document, it is also required that parties indicate whether they agree or disagree with the evaluation outcome when a scholar is classified with having a specific learning disability as well. Those are really the only times that we need to check agree or disagree, although I do know it's customary for participants to check agree or disagree pretty much across the board, but it is required for students with specific learning disabilities. So as you're creating these final documents for an IEP meeting, just make sure that you are listing all of the participants that are going to review the reevaluation or the evaluation report. The next section is the invitation to participate. Because we work with high school scholars, they are all either 14 or older or will turn 14 during their first year at Auden Reed. Not very many of our scholars come in at 13, and we just want to ensure that we're doing the invitations in the correct way. So if a scholar is 14 or will be 14 during an IEP term, they must be invited to their IEP meeting, and most preferably they should attend their IEP meeting. Scholars must be listed in the box of invitees. If you look here, scholar, it says child. Make sure that you check the box on the invitation, and the child's name will pop up in that box. Parents must also be invited to IEP meetings. While the invitation almost always is addressed to the parent, it is also good practice to include them in the list of attendees for the meeting. And in this case, you'll see that this person listed the parent as Jessica Jackson. So we want to make sure that we are including the parent in that list of attendees as well. Because the scholar is 14 or older, they also require transition planning. And so, you want to look at who is part of the transition group for that scholar. We can be inviting CTE teachers, transition counselors, guidance counselors. Any of those people should be invited to the IEP, as well as any outside agencies, including the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. Jill Grossberg is our representative. She sometimes can and sometimes will not attend IEP meetings based on documentation that she has. But please make sure that you continue to invite her. On this invitation, you'll see that Mr. Breeling was invited and Mr. Esposito was invited as the CTE representative for the school. And that is very good practice. You also must make sure that we are checking, that you are checking transition planning. Okay, they want to make sure that if we have scholars that are 14 or older, that they all understand, everybody understands that this scholar is in need of transition planning services. It's not the same as transition services. Transition services is for students who have more unique needs, but all students should have transition planning incorporated into the IEP meeting. The next section is transition. The transition section was actually focused on very heavily. So I'm going to ask that you please follow all the guidelines that are going to be set forth in this training, because it's very important. It's something that they definitely looked at very strategically because we have older scholars. So all students except ninth graders, because ninth graders come in and they don't have a CTE pathway. But beyond ninth grade, all scholars should have a SIP code at the top of their transition plan. There is a box. Sometimes I've noticed that there is information in there that is not appropriate for that section. The only thing that goes in there is the CIP code, the SIP code, and the SIP code correlates with the scholar's CTE pathway. If you do not have a list of the SIP codes, please email me and I will send you the list of SIP codes that we should be using in our scholars' transition plans. All right, the second part is that all scholars should have post-secondary education or training goals and employment goals, okay? On the next page, if we switch over real fast, there are a list of do's and don'ts for writing transition goals. So please review that. Goals for transition really are no different than any other kinds of IEP goals. They should have a time frame, they should have a specific task within a certain context, and a measurement parameter. Okay. So, for instance, I've seen quite a few IEPs that say when Jeff is finished high school, he wants to go to college. That's not a goal. We need to write it in goal language. And a perfect example, after high school, Elijah will enlist in the United States Air Force. After high school, it's got a time constraint. There is, there is a specific task. He will enlist into what? The United States Air Force. Upon completion of high school, Julie will gain acceptance to and enroll into the college program of her choice. After high school, Jordan will begin construction trades program at Job Corps. So they're all very, very specific task-oriented goals. The goal doesn't always necessarily need to change, but you should be having conversations with your scholars to make sure that the goals are actually relevant to their lives. And employment goals are similar. So I did put only, I think, up here, the only thing that you see is the post-secondary education goal. But employment goals are very similar. But active employment might actually occur during high school. So that's a little bit different. So during his senior year, or by June 1, Elijah will apply for competitive employment in the food service industry. So he's going to get a job at McDonald's. Okay. After high school, Julie will seek gainful employment in retail. She wants to work at H&M. During the summer between junior and senior year, Jordan will participate in the Work Ready program. That's providing him his first job, competitive job experience. As far as the independent living goals, not all scholars actually require them. And overall, our team does a really good job determining whether a scholar needs an independent living goal or not, and most of our kids don't. They are generally reserved for scholars who either have significant disabilities and for students who require transition supports, kids who are in foster care, have terminally ill parents who may need to be able to support themselves once they leave school because they may not have an adult in their lives to help them, emancipated youth, parenting teens. Those are the kinds of scholars who we should be developing independent living goals for, because they are most likely going to be out on their own or need significant supports in the outside world to be productive. So just make sure, the other thing that they looked at significantly was the activities that are built into scholars programming. So each goal needs to have specific activities that drive the scholar toward the goal. Currently, many activities are kind of generic and don't support the goal fully. So really take some time to think about what needs to happen in order for a scholar to master the goals that we're setting with them. And I say setting with them because it's their transition. We don't want to be setting goals for kids that we don't really have any clue. In ninth grade, the goal for post-secondary education is simply by June 1st, such and such a scholar will apply to and gain acceptance to the CTE pathway of their choice. And then some of the activities that go along with that is that they have worked through career cruising, they've created that portfolio, they are working to improve their reading and math skills by one grade level, not just improve their reading comprehension or improve their math skills. It has to be much more detailed. And the last thing that they should be doing is they will meet with the guidance counselor and complete the application. So those are the activities that go along with the goal. Those are what supports the goal mastery. So when you're doing those, please also make sure you are indicating the location, which is Universal Audenried Charter High School. Some of you keep clicking summer. Don't do that. We're not a summer program. We're a school. So it's Audenried High School. The frequency, how often are they working on career cruising? How often are they working on their portfolio? How often are they creating their resume or updating their resume? Things like that. The dates that it starts and the date that it ends, usually beginning of the IEP term, end of the IEP term. And then the responsible party. Please do not put somebody's name. What happens is, like for the last couple of years, we've had great returning rates for teachers. This year, we had a couple of teachers leave. Their names are in the IEP. They're still responsible for the IEP or that part of the IEP. So please just make sure that if you are making yourself responsible party for that activity, that you just put special education teacher, or you're just putting guidance counselor or career counselor. don't put a specific person's name in there. This way, it's easier to transfer the responsibility to the next person. All right. Look, we're about halfway through. Okay. Local assessments. I think this is the area we don't think about the most because we spend a lot of time making sure that our kids are getting the accommodations that they need for the Keystone assessments and things like that. But these local assessments are really important in high school. I mean, like super important. We don't really think about it. However, if we don't indicate what kind of tests a scholar is going to take, the local assessments that scholars are going to take, it really can put them at a deficit when they need to take some of the tests that we're going to talk about. But every scholar should have one of 4 boxes checked in local assessment, and preferably and specifically one of 3 boxes. So they should either have local assessment with accommodation, local assessment without accommodation, or alternative local assessment. Our scholars, believe it or not, are taking one of those 3 types of assessments: local, with or without accommodations. The 4th one says there's no local assessment administered at that student's grade level. And I really want to start moving away from doing that, because if we're writing an IEP for September or October of this year, next year that scholar is going to be in 10th, 11th, or 12th grade. And the IEP is not a school term, it is an annual document. So we get caught up in this area where, okay, a student doesn't take, and this is also for the for Keystones, student doesn't take a Keystone in 9th grade, and that's okay. But we get to December of their 10th grade year, and they may be taking the algebra Keystone. Or they're not taking the PSAT in 9th grade, but they're taking the PSAT in 10th grade. And so that, that reflects on whether or not they're going to be able to get the accommodations that they need for those other types of tests. Our scholars take tons of those local assessments. They take quarterfinals. They take AccuPlacer in order to go to CCP and other local community colleges. They take the PSAT in 10th grade, the SATs in 11th grade. They can take AP tests in 11th and 12th grade. Students requiring the accommodations for those assessments need to submit the local assessment portion of their IEP in order for them to be given the accommodations that are listed in the IEP. This document actually gets submitted to College Board, to the ACT program, to AccuPlacer, to community college, so they know that they get that extended time, that they get frequent breaks, so that they don't lose the time needed to take those assessments. Also, please be really specific on identifying what kind of accommodations. If you're saying extended time, give a time frame, 50% extended time. The SAT is a 4-hour long test. If you give a student 100% extended time, that test is now 8 hours long. You really want to also explain to parents what that means, because it can be really hard for a kid to sit through an 8 hours of standardized testing. So you want to make sure that you're writing it and that it makes sense. So 50% extended time gives kids about an extra 2 hours on the SAT. So that's good to know. So they'll get some additional time to be able to complete the test to the best of their ability. Use of calculator for math items, for all math items, for recommended math items, for allowable math items. So, and then, the use of breaks. Okay, student gets frequent breaks. What does frequent breaks mean to you versus what does frequent breaks mean to me? So please make sure you're being very, very clear about what a frequent break is. Student gets a break every 30 minutes. Student gets a 5-minute break every 45 minutes. Make sure that it makes sense for the scholar. And then also, please do not indicate in the IEP that a scholar gets small group 1 to 5. It is so difficult to try and build testing schedules around those types of small groups. Most of our scholars, within reason, require small group up to about 12 scholars. And that's to kind of like deflect from the different distractions that scholars often face when they're in larger groups. But also think really hard about whether or not a scholar really needs small group testing. If it's a scholar who doesn't have attentive problems, doesn't have a need for preferential seating, doesn't seem to get off task, is not distracted, then there's no reason to have small group testing. We really need to be thoughtful about how we are rolling out accommodations to scholars. If a scholar doesn't need something, then you don't give it to them. Okay? All right. So that is on local assessment, and I'm sorry that I went off my soapbox. Okay? This was the other area that the state really came down on us about. And I had lots of long conversations with our advisor, and she's quite lovely. So ESY determination. So this was scrutinized pretty heavily. And while discussing what should be included in this section, our advisor clarified the requirement, and she approved the language that I submitted to her. And she liked it very much. So there were a couple things that we really need to make sure that's in there. And so moving forward, this is the language that needs to be in the IEP. Like copied verbatim with the changes where if a student is actually qualified for ESY, determined to need ESY services, you can actually make the changes in the wording. So in the language, we need to address the state statute and the 7 determining factors. And that needs to be in the language that we are putting into the IEP. So at the end of the language, if a student is eligible for ESY, you can address it, but make sure that you're using one or more of the 7 factors. So based on the information and the data reviewed at the IEP meeting, the team has determined that John is eligible for ESY based on regression and recoupment. That's it. That's the last line, and that should be added into the IEP. If a student is not eligible, just use the language provided. It's actually in a drop-down menu, or you can just copy and paste it from whatever document you're working from. But it must be uniform, and it must address all of the areas that we addressed in the language that we are using. Please do not check the box that says ESY will be determined at a later date. Please don't do that. So I'm making that request because I came across several IEPs where case managers wrote in that their IEPs will be checked on a certain date or would be reviewed at a certain date, and it never got reviewed. And so now I'm looking at IEPs that were written in October, November, December, January of 2019, 2020, and we've gone through the summer. They were not provided ESY because it was never determined whether the scholar needed ESY. So please, during the IEP meeting, make the determination. Does the scholar require ESY services, or does the scholar not require ESY services? It's really important because we can't wait till the last minute to make a determination because there's a lot of other things that have to happen. And then with high incidence students, ESY must be determined prior to the end of February every year. So let's just go ahead and make that determination at the meeting. We can always go back and decide if a scholar really needs to have ESY services. Okay? All right. We are getting to the nitty-gritty here. Demographics. Making sure IEPs are complete and correct. I'm not sure how this happens, but it does. And we want to make sure that we are providing high quality IEPs. Quality is apparent in the grammar, in our punctuation, in mechanics, and whether information that we are presenting is complete and accurate. In a few instances, there were errors and omissions on the cover page of the IEP. Not really a great look. So please make sure that parents' names and addresses are listed and spelled correctly. Make sure that all information is complete. Much of this information drops in, but review it with the parent. Hey, is this information correct? Do we have the right address? Do you have an updated phone number? Make sure that all of that's addressed prior to finalizing the IEP. And also, please make sure the county is listed as Philadelphia. I can't even begin to tell you how many IEPs that I reviewed. Pike County was listed as our county. And it's literally a drop-down box that can be edited in the profile. Also, please include the scholar's literacy and math instructional level in the other information section. Here on my form, you can see that it's listed right at the bottom, just below the COVID language, because that's where COVID language goes initially. Please also make sure you're listing it in the IEP snapshot. So not only that the parent has a copy of it, but the teachers can see it in that snapshot right at the bottom in other information, instructional levels, math literacy. Okay. Last but not least, we need to look at NOREPs and IEP placement. In several instances, the placement listed in the IEP, so like supplemental learning support, did not match the NOREP placement, like supplemental emotional support. Or it didn't list, it just said learning support or emotional support. We want to make sure that they align perfectly. Please, please, please make sure they match. You can actually copy the placement from the IEP directly into the NOREP. That alleviates any mistakes. So when you create a new NOREP, it'll ask you, do you want to copy information from another document? Yes. And that might be the only thing that you want to copy. But you can copy placement, and it will drop directly into the NOREP. I don't know if I have a copy of that. Hang on, I'll show you what it looks like. Oh, no, I don't. Okay, but it will take it and drop it directly into the NOREP for you. And it'll actually have a much larger listing, and that's okay. But yeah, just go ahead and please make sure that that happens. And then also include the placement level. So supplemental, itinerant, full-time, and the service that they provide, provided. Life skills, emotional support, learning support in the NOREP. If you're going to do it by hand, you have to have both pieces. It's not just learning support. It's not just emotional support. It's what level of those services are they reading. All right. So all that being said, if we take time and we are to review the documents that we're creating, it will lead to cleaner, more high quality, more compliant documents. Yeah, and overall, we did really, really well, I have to say. Those were the areas that they dinged us on, and they were like 1 or 2 out of, but then just going back and auditing, we found more of those same errors. And we had to submit 10 correct documents of each of these areas. And so there was certainly a lot to choose from, and that was great. So I commend you guys for really trying very hard to create documents that are of a high quality. And then these are just the areas that we need to clean up. Please remember to click on that little exclamation point that will actually take you to the survey for this training, so we can submit that to the state. There will also, once you submit it, there will also be a sign-in page for everybody to sign to indicate that they've received this training. The next training that we're going to do will start focusing on individual IEP areas. Some of this may be recovered and some of it may be new to us. But I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this. I hope that it answered any questions. I'm certainly looking forward to seeing really nice, clean IEPs moving forward. And again, if you have any questions, concerns, conundrums, please reach out to me via email or phone or text. You all know how to reach me. And I look forward to having excellent IEPs. Thanks a bunch, everybody. Have a great afternoon.